welcome to Nowhere to Hide. I'm Brian Hyde, and I'm happy to sit down with you this week and talk just a little bit about some of the things that are going on in terms of we're seeing some incredible shifts taking place on the national stage, and now it looks like we're likely to see some shifts taking place here in Idaho as well. So you probably heard about the Department of Governmental Efficiency, DOGE for short. There's some master level trolling that's going on right now, both on the part of President-elect Donald Trump with some of his cabinet picks, as well as Elon Musk, who is one of those cabinet picks, who, along with Vivek Ramaswamy, has been tagged to head up the Department of Governmental Efficiency. So, if you're not familiar with this, I'll give you the thumbnail sketch. Long story short, these are individuals who are going to be tasked with cutting $2 trillion from the federal operating costs. In other words, they're looking for government waste and they're looking for ways to eliminate it. Now, you can imagine the kind of panic that that's putting in the hearts of people within the Beltway, especially those career bureaucrats who have secured themselves a very nice, comfortable place where they only have to work just enough to fog a mirror, metaphorically, and not much else. And they're very, very hard to get rid of in many cases. However, it's very clear that the American people in their vote, I know some people hesitate to use the word mandate, but it was a pretty resounding message that business as usual, which is to grow government, grow the programs, grow its control, grow its costs and spending, has been business as usual for quite some time now, and people are tired of it. And we see the effects as government allows the Federal Reserve to print money and to add more and more money to the money supply, which in turn waters down the purchasing power of every single dollar that we have, whether it's in hand or being saved. You know this. When you go to the grocery store, you see it, you feel it, and so do the rest of us. So this is an idea whose time has come, but I don't expect those career bureaucrats to go without a fight. They are going to be very, very upset. And probably rightly so. But I wanted to give you just kind of a little idea. What are some of the things that they're going to be looking for that they might be able to eliminate? You do tell me. Should the government continue paying $1.3 billion a year to deceased individuals? I mean, the thought is nice, but they're dead. They don't really need it. How about unemployment and Social Security payments to prisoners? Well, they earned it, but okay. But if they're in government custody, they're being taken care of. Their basic needs are met. That's money that could be better spent elsewhere. For instance, people who aren't in government custody. Maybe we should talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives. About $38.7 million allocated to DEI hires, prompting many debates about the effectiveness and necessity of such spending. Then you have, research on Russian cats. The National Institutes of Health allocated $549,000 to study the movement of Russian cats on treadmills. Why would we need to know this? Well, I don't know exactly, but that seems way more legitimate than the transgender monkey research that the NIH also spent $477,000 on, basically trying to discover whether they could turn monkeys transgender or not and then turn them back. And again, this is at the federal level. But I think most people who have at least some concept of how the federal government operates understand they will spare no expense because the taxpayers are always good, for whatever tax money is being used to do this. And if they don't have it on hand, well, then we'll just borrow it. And that seems to be the standard modus operandi to keeping that federal Leviathan going. I mean, look, maybe I sound a little bit giddy at the prospect of this changing, but frankly, I for one would love to see this happen. But I also want to caution you that this is not the only place our focus needs to be. In fact, here in Idaho, we need to be focusing very, very closely on, I'm going to use the term efficiency, but I want you to understand, I don't necessarily want an efficient government in the sense that it just smoothly is able to grow and tax and spend. And, there are some things I want it to be difficult for it to do. Spending taxpayer money, that should be difficult. And this is why we have deliberative lawmaking bodies like our state legislature, which has checks and balances and separation of powers and breaks it up into committees. And these things have to be discussed. It can't just be, yeah, we want that, we'll rubber stamp it and take it. So at the state level, Where is our Department of Government Efficiency? Where is our watchdog that is keeping track of government waste and doing its best to prevent us from being fleeced by well-meaning but sometimes self-serving politicians who think that this is their license to just do as they want, or sometimes more appropriately, to do as their strongest lobbyists would like them to do? Well, the answer is you have it in organizations like the Idaho Freedom Foundation, which provides a legislative scorecard that rates bits of legislation and policy against, okay, how does this stack up in terms of how it affects your personal freedom? How does it stack up in terms of being responsible and accountable in how taxpayer funds are being used? Most importantly, does it jive with the proper role of government? And I know that's a touchy subject for some people. Well, that's totally a subjective thing, and people can just kind of make up their own minds. No, constitutions, by their nature, are a compact, meaning it is a multi-party legal contract. Now, in the case of the United States Constitution, you have a contract which was put together at the behest of the states, which came together with representatives, or delegates as they were called, who called into existence, by virtue of that contract, a federal government and vested it. In other words, temporarily lent it powers in certain very specified areas written out in the Constitution that told this is what these particular branches of government are to do, this is how they are to operate, this is the upper limit of their powers. State constitutions operate much the same way. They tell the government the form that it is supposed to take, they tell it what its functions are supposed to be, but most importantly, they tell it what its proper limits are. Now, I know politicians often are quick with words, and they're creative, and so they often will look for creative ways to justify things that they really want. And to be honest, there are things that politicians want that sounds like, wow, that actually might be a really good thing. But the measure that we always have to come back to, is it something that is actually part of the legitimate powers of government according to the Constitution, whether it be of the state or of the federal government? And if the answer is no, then the principled answer is no, we shouldn't be doing that. I know, that's hard. And sometimes it even catches conservatives, who I think are probably more aware of this and more insistent on, let's keep it within the lines of what is appropriate and what isn't appropriate, for government. We want to make sure that government isn't always expanding, because when it does, what happens? Our freedoms diminish, our pocketbook is hit, and this is something that we've learned something about in a lot of detail over the last few years, particularly in the last 4 years. Yes, even in Idaho. I would hold, for example, the COVID response as an example of, well-meaning, but still misguided government officials stepped beyond their legitimate boundaries of power and inflicted lockdowns. They had police arresting people for singing hymns in a church parking lot, arresting a mom who took her kids to the park, and that was seen as a legitimate exercise of government power, when in fact they had no power to do that. And they really don't like a lot of accountability on that. But thankfully, there are organizations who track these kind of things, who track government waste. By the way, if you haven't checked out the Idaho Freedom Foundation's pork report, go to idahofreedom.org/24pork, and you'll see a lot of examples. And this is not saying that, well, we need to make sure that everybody who serves in, the state legislature and every program that they do, everything has to be done with absolute austerity. And, we're sending our public servants out basically in sackcloth and ashes. No, that's not the point. But the point is that it's very easy to become a bit lavish when you're on the taxpayer's dime. And Idaho representatives, Idaho legislative members, they're prone to those same temptations as their federal counterparts, although the federal counterparts have taken it to a whole new degree. The kicker is, if you need to reform a system like this, and I'm going to go back to the federal government for just a moment, what's the best way to do it? Well, you bring in somebody who's an insider who knows how that system works. No, you don't, because they have a vested interest in keeping that system exactly the way it is. That's how they maintain their insider status. In fact, that is part of the problem. Is both at the state level as well as the federal level. It's way too insular, because these insiders, we'll call them the establishment types, they get used to doing business a certain way regardless of whether it comports with the proper role of government or not. So when you see new faces come on the scene, and again, at the federal level, you're seeing new faces from RFK Jr. to Tulsi Gabbard to Elon Musk, and even Vivek Ramaswamy, all of whom have been criticized. Well, they don't really have that much governmental, experience. I mean, Kennedy was a senator, uh, but still, they don't have the bureaucratic experience. But that's kind of the point. They're not trained to see this in how do I stake out the biggest chunk of change for my bureaucracy and then protect it. Likewise, you are seeing some new faces coming into Idaho in the last few years, and there are some standout legislators who toe the line, who keep the cost of government as minimal as possible, and above all, are accountable to the citizenry. How do you know who these legislators are? Well, look for the ones that are being labeled as extremist or far right or ultra conservative. Those are the cuss words that the establishment uses, whether it's politicians or whether it's their lapdog press, to try to paint such individuals as a danger. So, how do you get a fair assessment? Well, ultimately, it's on your shoulders and my shoulders. We have to be willing to step up and do the hard work of thinking things through for ourselves. Now, having said that, it's helpful to know that there are organizations that exist, like the Idaho Freedom Foundation, that also keeps a very close track of what's going on and shares that information. And it's not for partisan concerns. Oh, only Republicans get to do this. They they measure how each legislative member votes and weighs and scores their votes against how does it affect your freedom. And as you've seen in the last couple of years, there are a number of legislators who are now no longer returning to the legislature because their legislative record showed they talk the talk. Oh, yes, I'm a Republican. I'm a common sense, mainstream Republican, but they govern like a liberal Democrat and spend money like their federal counterparts. Apparently, that's not something that people are real interested in right now, and that's a good thing. So, the ride is likely to get bumpy. You're going to see some contention. You're going to see some name calling. And particularly, you're going to see name calling on the part of those who are trying to rein government into its proper level. But just rest assured, departments of government efficiency should be operating at every possible level. Some of you do this at the local level. You keep your county commissions and your city councils accountable, as you should. This is part of being engaged in civics. This is part of your part of exercising your franchise, not just in the voting booth, but what you do before and after you vote. And that's important. So a few thoughts for you there on government efficiency, departments of government efficiency, and just know you have people on your side. But you still got to be willing to shoulder some of that work yourself to study things out, think them through, and hold your elected representatives accountable if they should stray outside the lines of their legitimate authority. I'm Brian Hyde, and this is